We're gonna take a break from the usual stuff and look at something a little different for today. So a few years back, I made a video on the original Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 while the remake was still on the horizon. Since then, I was able to play Modern Warfare 2 2022, and I have to say that narratively, it doesn't really hit the same way as the original's campaign. Maybe it's a bit of nostalgia, but I still prefer the OG and honestly would go as far as to say that in terms of story quality, it's still Infinity Ward's best. This is something that I'm hoping to rectify in what I'll now refer to as the extended version of my original Modern Warfare 2 video, since in the original, I didn't really get into anything all that much aside from just throwing out some thoughts and just some random stuff that I knew. It's worth noting that back in the day, Call of Duty was like an unstoppable empire that everyone wanted to take a piece of the pie of, but off the top of my head, the only real competitor was the Battlefield series. These two were like Coke vs Pepsi, McDonald's vs Burger King, Brady vs Manning. You know the drill. Whichever series someone preferred was up to them, but there was no doubt that Call of Duty absolutely dominated the market. And with that out of the way, let's get into Modern Warfare 2. Starting from the beginning, Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 is a first-person shooter that released on November 10th back in 2009. The game was welcomed with praise, having a 94 Metacritic on both the Xbox 360 and the PS3, with the PC version also coming in at a commendable 86 score. The game was applauded for its content, but criticized for a shorter campaign length and a lack of innovation. There was also the no Russian mission controversy, which journalists at the time had considered to be tasteless since it was essentially allowing the player to partake in an act of aggressive terrorism within the game. None of this would stop the game from being a hit, however, as in the game's first 24 hours, it had almost sold 5 million copies, and by the end of 2009, its sales would reach 6 million, becoming the highest selling game of that year. At the time, it was record-breaking for Activision, as the pre-orders for Modern Warfare 2 were the highest of any game that they had published. As for current figures, the original Modern Warfare 2 stands at about having close to 23 million copies sold, numbers that would still be considered incredible even in 2024. The game had also shipped with multiple different editions. For starters, there was a standard edition which only included the game and a manual, but then there was the Hardened, the Veteran, and the Prestige editions. The Hardened edition came in a steel case and included an art book and a token for a downloaded version of an HD remaster of Call of Duty Classic. The Veteran edition would include all this, but also come with a statue. And lastly, the Prestige edition would come shipped with everything from the Hardened edition, but also the inclusion of a stand sculpted in the head of Soap McTavish and a pair of functioning night vision goggles. The game would also have a Nintendo DS version titled Call of Duty Modern Warfare Mobilized. It's worth mentioning that this version doesn't follow the same story as Modern Warfare 2 and is basically just considered a companion narrative tied into the universe of the original Modern Warfare trilogy. Outside of that, Modern Warfare 2 would also have a comic book tie-in involving the popular Simon Ghost Riley character, as well as a number of other promotions. This includes the Modern Warfare 2 Mad Catz controller and a Monster Energy drink promotion, which gave codes that could have been redeemed for different rewards at the time. In addition to this, there was also a special limited edition Modern Warfare 2 version of the Xbox 360, which also included a copy of the standard edition of Modern Warfare 2. It's also worth mentioning that Modern Warfare 2 2009 would be the last game involving Infinity Ward founders Jason West and Vince Zampella, who would be released by Activision in 2010. The two would go on to work for Electronic Arts after founding Respawn Entertainment, a company known for games like Apex Legends and the amazing Titanfall 2. This whole thing is a rabbit hole on its own, and not really what I wanted to focus on, but it is worth mentioning since the two were responsible for shaping Call of Duty into the juggernaut franchise that it had been for many years. And now we finally come to the remastered campaign of Modern Warfare 2, which is what I'll be pulling from and covering in this video. This version would release on PlayStation 4 on March 31st, 2020, and on the Xbox One and PC on April 30th of the same year. This version obviously doesn't include the multiplayer component or the Spec Ops side content, as it's just the campaign, but buyers of this version would receive the UDT Classic Ghost Bundle for Modern Warfare 2019 and Warzone. As for what this bundle is, it was one of Ghost's outfits from the original Modern Warfare 2. Nothing else really to say for the game itself, as everything in the game is nearly the same, apart from it being visually updated. It is at least worth mentioning that this version isn't rated nearly as high as the original, having a mixed Metascore of 71. The events of the game are honestly some of the most memorable in the series. But before I continue, spoiler warning, skip ahead to this timestamp if you don't actually want to hear any of this part. Let's do this. The Modern Warfare 2 campaign is split up between multiple different characters. Each level consists of a briefing and then the events of the level themselves. The game starts out with a little backstory showing some events from the previous game, Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare. At this moment, we learn that 5 years have passed since then. This is followed by narration from Commander Shepard talking about things like history being written by the victor and that when you take down one enemy, they're just replaced by someone even worse. The whole monologue here ends with Shepard telling Sergeant Foley that he's looking for recruits, which moves us to the beginning level, SSDD. Here, you play as Private Allen with the level set in Afghanistan. This level acts as a tutorial to introduce the player to the game by doing things like aiming down the sights and throwing grenades. The player is then tasked with running a training course titled The Pit, where you go around eliminating targets while avoiding civilian casualties while Commander Shepard looks on. It's worth mentioning that it is actually possible to kill Shepard here, though it doesn't really do anything except cause you to have to restart from a checkpoint. Anyways, after completing the pit and choosing whatever difficulty you want, you continue the game with a siren blaring where you find out a unit is trapped in the red zone and that they've lost contact with them. This level ends with Sergeant Foley telling everyone to get to a vehicle because they're moving out. Nothing spectacular here. It's just the game's tutorial, like I said. Moving along to the mission Team Player, we have yet another briefing with Shepard. During this scene, Shepard explains that the US has the most powerful military and that every fight is their fight, with him explaining the utilization and teachings of Modern Warfare, with Shepard once again explaining that history is written by the victor. Continuing off of SSDD, Team Player is another level set in Afghanistan as the game begins with Private Allen being blown the heck out of a Humvee by an RPG. This is followed by Shepard picking up Allen and saying,
"Get up, Private Allen! Rangers lead the way!"
Allen then joins in on a firefight, which eventually leads to the group mounting up in another set of Humvees and a scene of a building getting blown up with the soldiers saying Shepard doesn't care about danger close, which is when friendly forces are near an intended target designated for artillery or bombs. After this, the Rangers move out into some narrow streets where they're then attacked by sniper fire. This sequence is ended with the Humvee that Allen is in flipping over with his team taking cover in a building with Allen and the crew securing the area. They eventually make it to a school where they once again secure the area, which leads to the team moving to a rally point where Private Allen is then officially recruited by Commander Shepard, saying that he'll be taking orders from him from now on. The next mission is called Cliffhanger, and during the briefing of this section, we see that Allen is now reassigned. Essentially, we're informed here that Allen is to take on an undercover assignment where he says that the antagonist Vladimir Makarov is the prize. Shepard responds by saying that Makarov is just a killer and then welcomes Allen to Task Force 141, which is supposed to be a group of the best handpicked soldiers around the world. We then find out Sergeant Gary Roach Sanderson, who we're now playing as, and Captain Soap McTavish are on a mission to recover a downed ACS module that is located behind enemy lines in Kazakhstan. This mission begins with Soap and Roach scaling the side of a mountain in a snowy environment. They then sneak through a base, taking out enemies with stealth under the cover of a blizzard. Roach eventually goes and plants explosives on a fueling station, after which he regroups with Soap at the enemy hangar. Roach then goes off from Soap and secures the ACS module, but when he returns, it's discovered that Soap is compromised. This leads Roach to blow up the fueling station, where the two then follow up by bodying the enemy soldiers. They then rush off the base, eventually coming across some snowmobiles that they use to get away. During this sequence, they're chased by soldiers, resulting in them having to fight their way out before they eventually jump across a really large gap in the mountain where they are able to make their escape via helicopter. Moving on to the next mission, we have the controversial No Russian. During this briefing, Shepard tells Allen that 141 was able to successfully complete their mission with only 2 people. We then find out Private Allen is now under the alias of Alexei Borodin. Shepard here explains that Makarov is pretty much a really bad dude who trades blood for money and that he's our new best friend. So basically, we're playing as Allen here, who is undercover as one of Makarov's men, and the mission itself takes place in the Zakhay Zayav International Airport of Moscow, Russia. During this mission, it's pretty much chaos with civilians being attacked by Makarov and his crew. I'll be honest, there really isn't much to say here. Eventually the group is attacked by FSB, which is the Federal Security Service. They make their way through them where Makarov and crew are eventually led to a van where Alan is then shot and killed, with Makarov saying that when his body's found, Russia will cry for war. The next briefing, we officially find out that Alan was killed in action, and then we hear a conversation between Ghost and Soap saying that Russia won't let the massacre go unanswered, as the picture is now painted that the American Alan was the one behind the attack. In the mission takedown, Task Force 141 is then sent to find proof that Makarov was the one who orchestrated the attack. This leads them to Rio de Janeiro, where they are then tasked with finding Alejandro Rojas, who we're told is the one who supplied the assault. This mission begins with Task Force 141 following behind a van. They eventually run into and then chase after a man who knows where Rojas is located. The beginning section is a run through the streets of Brazil, with mayhem happening all around, with the player eventually tasked with dropping the target with a non-lethal takedown. This is followed by a scene where it's presumed that Soap and Ghost torture the man for information, and then Roach is split off to find more information on Rojas. The next section is even more chaotic, as the group is led through a favela where they're under fire by a militia the whole way through. We eventually hear through radio chatter that the team has in fact spotted Rojas. This leads a player to have to fight through some more extremely narrow areas primed for ambush. After this section, we see Soap tackling Rojas down into a car where they detain him, and then the level ends with the group saying that they are on their own. The next briefing switches back to the Rangers. In this scene, we find out that the United States is under attack, which they initially believe was a glitch. This is followed by some dialogue where we find out that the Rangers are in one of the areas being attacked. This mission is called Wolverines, and the level is set in northeastern Virginia within the United States. In this mission, you play as Private James Ramirez, who is riding passenger in a Humvee that's eventually blown up by a BTR. From here, the player makes their way through some backyards and streets, eventually throwing some smoke grenades to get by a BTR and into an alley where the Rangers regroup at a restaurant near a crash site where they're tasked with defending the location of a government official VIP codenamed Raptor. During this section, Ramirez uses a Predator drone to take out targets and then is tasked to secure and defend a burger town while the squad moves Raptor. After this point, the player is then tasked with eliminating enemy gunships by using Stinger missiles. Once all this is done, the level's pretty much over, with Ramirez regrouping with a convoy with the VIP secured. The following briefing takes us back to Task Force 141 in Brazil, where it pretty much shows that America is under attack by Russia, which makes them unable to extract. This results in Soap saying that he knows a guy who could get them out, this being returning character from Call of Duty 4, Nikolai. We then find out that the only person that Makarov hates worse than the Americans is locked up in the Gulag. The level here, the Hornet's Nest, is a continuation off of Takedown, where we see Task Force 141 fighting their way to a landing zone. The team makes it to the first landing zone, but it's apparently too hot, so they're then tasked with moving to a secondary location. This section's main event has Roach split off from the rest of the group after falling off of a rooftop, where the player then has to run through the area to make their way back to the rooftops. This level ends with Roach jumping to a helicopter rope ladder to escape the militia presence, thus sending the level with Soap telling Nikolai to get them to a sub. The next briefing is back to the Rangers, with Shepard saying that he's commandeering Sergeant Foley's unit, and that he's requisitioned a striker from the 8th Armored. In this level, named Exodus, the player is once again in northeastern Virginia in the United States. The goal of this level is pretty much taking down anti-aircraft guns so that civilians can evacuate the area. In the same way as the opening part of Wolverines, you're pretty much making your way through houses. However, in this level, Ramirez has the ability to mark targets to get the striker gunner, named Honey Badger, to lay down fire. Midway through the level, the Rangers are given additional orders to divert to a house after they destroy the anti-aircraft guns, where they are to extract a high-value individual from a panic room. Once there, they find a crashed plane that's destroyed half of the house, with the target inside being dead. Ramirez is then told by Sergeant Foley to grab intel from a briefcase, which then prompts Dunn to take notice of suspicious tattoos of a deceased person in the other room, which then ends the level. We're then switched back to Task Force 141 as Roach. During this briefing, we hear Soap ask Shepard why they aren't being sent to the fight. Shepard then tells Soap that the person they're searching for is Prisoner 627, who they can't currently get to. This leads Task Force to be sent to oil rigs that Russians are using as SAM sites. However, they can't just blow them up because there's oil workers being being used as human shields. Therefore, they're being sent into the site as a way to pave the way to prisoner 627. When the level The Only Easy Day Was Yesterday actually begins, the player is underwater where they're deployed to the rig via a steel delivery vehicle, or SDV. The location in this mission is an oil platform off of the coast of Russia. The introduction has the player attacking a guard who's then disposed of in the ocean. From here on, the mission is a series of breach and clears, with the player having to attack soldiers so that they can free oil workers who are being held captive, and also have Marines come and dismantle the SAM sites. The group eventually has their cover blown after they plant and blow off C4 on bodies. Not long after this point, the team ends up having to do one last breach and clear in a room that's trapped with explosives. They successfully do this and then head to a landing zone, which ends the level. Continuing on from the previous level is essentially what serves as part 2 of the mission, which starts us with a briefing with Soap explaining the history of the Gulag and that the goal is to free prisoner 627. This mission, titled The Gulag, is another mission set in Russia. Here, you're once again playing as Roach, where we have a full-on assault of, well, the Gulag. You start off on board a helicopter where you're sniping dudes to help clear the area so that the teams could land safely. After this, the team fights through the Gulag to go and rescue 627. It's worth mentioning that this is another level with a few breach and clear slow-mo moments, but the notable one is the second, where we come to find out that 627 is Captain Price from Call of Duty 4, who we discovered had actually survived the first game. Here, Price notices Soap and then calls him by his name, which prompts another member to ask,
Who's Soap?
From here, the group ends up making their escape through the Gulag, with Roach getting knocked out towards the end of the level due to falling debris. Soap then shoots a flare through an opening in the ceiling where a rope comes down and the group clips onto it, being pulled out from the Gulag, where we see that it's being blown up. The briefing after this starts with an emergency broadcast system alert going off. When this ends, this mission begins with the mission Of Their Own Accord, where we find ourselves as James Ramirez, who is now in an underground evac site in Washington, D.C. The player then regroups with the other Rangers, who rush right into a war zone to the Department of Commerce building, where they make their way through the building and find themselves on a stockpile of enemy weapons. This prompts Ramirez to end up having to use a sniper rifle to take out foot mobiles using javelin rockets. After this event, the Rangers head to the roof of the building to rendezvous with the SEAL team and evac via chopper. At this moment, the player has to clear a World War II memorial monument by manning a minigun on the helicopter. Not too long after this, the helicopter's down while attempting to take out SAM sites. This leads to one of the Rangers handing Ramirez an M4 before the man shot and killed. Ramirez then fires off at enemies while still being trapped inside of the helicopter. He uses all of his ammo and then Sergeant Foley tosses him one last mag while they defend their position. While this goes on, Corporal Dunn is eventually shot and then the screen flashes to white after a searchlight of a helicopter shines on the crash site, thus ending the level. The following briefing is now back to Task Force 141. Here, we have a conversation between Shepard and Price with an image of a submarine being sent to Shepard. Price goes on to tell him that if Shepard wants to put out an oil fire, then he needs to start an even bigger explosion. Shepard here pretty much says Price is crazy from being locked up for too long, which results in Price asking him if he's willing to do whatever it takes to win. Shepard doesn't agree with this, telling Price to focus on taking down Makarov. The connection is then cut with the group continuing on with the mission called Contingency, where we are still in Russia. Once again, we're playing as Roach and we are with Captain Price this time. The mission involves the two stealthily making their way through some snowy forests, sniping people along the way to a submarine base. Before they could get there, however, there's a brief section with Roach taking control of a Predator drone to thin the enemy numbers. They do eventually make it to the submarine base, where Captain Price goes on to launch a nuclear missile into the air, which also ends the level. The next briefing, we see the missile being launched with the cutscene moving to an underground base in Colorado. This scene has the Secretary of Defense talking about the missile's vector being en route to the East Coast. Shepard goes on to say that all the systems will go down and that there will be 30 to 50,000 casualties depending on the location of the detonation. Pretty much what happens here is Shepard says Makarov needs to be brought to light, and then he's given a blank check to get whatever he needs to make it happen. In the next level, titled Second Son, we take control of James Ramirez, where we once again have to replay the section where he's being given the M4 by the soldier who's shot in the head, with Corporal Dunn son being shot shortly after as well. This time, however, when the helicopter comes and spots the light on Ramirez, the flash leads to a scene with an astronaut in space. At this point, we see the nuclear missile and its eventual blast with the astronaut being blown away and presumably killed. The following scene goes back to the Rangers with an explosion happening in the sky, followed by helicopters crashing down and going boom. While this happens, one of the Rangers frees Ramirez from the helicopter wreckage, where the group runs to an opening in a building as choppers continue to fall down from the sky, with one last explosion before Sergeant Foley tells a panicking Dunn to shut up because their weapons still work, which means that they could still fight. Foley then goes outside and the Rangers continue through the streets of Washington, D.C., where they meet up with a soldier who tells them to get to Whiskey Hotel. After fighting what remains of the enemy forces along the way, the Rangers eventually come across the president's bunker, where they find that it's flooded. This ends Second Son and begins the mission Whiskey Hotel. There's no briefing in this mission since it's an immediate continuation. In this mission, there's another war zone happening, this time in front of the White House. During this scene, it's learned that the White House still has power, which could be used to contact Central Command if it's taken. This leads Sergeant Foley and the Rangers to storm the White House. Upon heading into the White House, they make it to the Oval Office, where they find out that the city is going to be leveled due to Hammer Down protocol going into effect. This essentially means Washington, D.C. is going to be leveled with airstrikes, and buildings not marked by green flares were going to be blown up. At this moment, the group rushes through the White House, absolutely botting everything in an attempt to rush to the roof. Naturally, they make it to the top of the White House and then pop green flares, causing the fighter pilots to abort their strike at the last second. This is followed by my favorite interaction in the whole game.
So, when we going to Moscow?
Not soon enough, man. But I know we're gonna burn it down when we get there.
When the time's right, Corporal. When the time's right.
And with that, we have the end of Whiskey Hotel and the Rangers section of Modern Warfare 2. This mission is followed by another briefing with Task Force 141, where we find Shepard telling them that he has a blank check and that they're going to use every last cent of it to take down Makarov. We then find out that there's two remaining places where Makarov could be. One at the Caucasus Mountain near the Georgian-Russian border, and the other in Afghanistan. Task Force 141 is then split up, with Roach and Ghost going to the safe house in the mountains, and Soap and Price heading to Afghanistan. This brings the start of the mission Loose Ends, where we are once again playing as Roach. Following Ghost, Roach heads to Makarov's safe house on the Georgia-Russia border, where the group is ambushed after setting off bouncing Bettys. Roach survives the assault, continuing on with the remaining members of the group, who push to and breach and clear the safe house. After this, the team collects intel while defending the safe house as they wait for Shepard's extraction forces. Roach then grabs the data storage module filled with intel and runs off to the landing zone, where he's knocked out by an explosion. Ghost grabs and drags Roach, and they continue to the landing zone, with Roach holding off enemies. The two make it to Shepard safely, where we see yet another iconic moment happen.
You have the DSM. We got it, sir. Good. That's one less loose end.
So in this scene, Roach was shot by Shepard, and then Ghost tries to attack him, but is then shot in the chest. After this, we hear radio chatter with Captain Price screaming that they're being attacked by Shepard's men over in the boneyard of Afghanistan, and for them to not trust Shepard. Obviously, it's too late for this, as their bodies are then thrown into a pit where the remains are incinerated by Shepard and his men. The following briefing has Soap yelling for Roach and Ghost, but obviously they're dead. Price tells Soap that Shepard was cleaning house and gets into contact with an inbound Nikolai, who says that Shepard and Makarov's men are fighting each other. In this mission, named The Enemy of My Enemy, you're now playing as Soap, who's in eastern Afghanistan. There isn't much to this mission, it's mostly just running through bodying dudes as you make your way to a rally point. Midway through though, Price contacts Makarov, who goes on to give Price Shepard's location. Soap continues onto a runway after this, where he gets into a Jeep with Rook and Price. Driving away and fighting off enemies, Rook gets shot in the head, which prompts Soap to have to take the wheel, steering into the ramp of Nikolai's plane, where they successfully escape. The next briefing shows that Price and Soap are wanted now. This prompts Price to have a monologue proclaiming that they'll kill Shepard in the end. In the mission, just like old times, we now find that Soap and Price are at Site Hotel Bravo in Afghanistan. The two then head into the site, taking out patrols as they make their way to and through some caves. They eventually end up in a room that's breached by Shepard's men, and then they fight them off. After bodying the entire group, we then hear some radio chatter with Shepard now known knowing that Price is at the site. Eventually, they hit another breaching point where they drop a room full of dudes in a control room that's rigged with C4. After this, we then hear Shepard talking on a loudspeaker where he issues Order 116 Bravo because the site's been compromised. Price then yells to Soap to override the door controls. The two then rush out of the room as explosions go off, and we see that Shepard sends a danger close fire mission. We see at this point a bunch of Shepard's men got bodied by the strike as we clean up the rest, fighting to another cave where the level ends. The final briefing message here is an audio message of Price saying history is written by the victor, and that history is written by liars, and that Shepard's lie will become truth if they die. As this ends, the start of the mission endgame begins. Soap and Price grab a boat and head off to catch Shepard, fighting Shepard's remaining men along the way. Eventually, they catch up to Shepard, who appears to have been extracted, but then Price shoots the helicopter out of the sky before they could go any further as a sandstorm approaches. After this, and while trying to back the boat up, both Price and Soap are swept down a waterfall. Soap ends up on a shore hearing Price say that they can't let Shepard escape. Searching the crash site, Soap sees an injured Shepard running away. Soap follows him, but before he could go in for the kill, he's stabbed by Shepard. We then hear Shepard talk about how 5 years ago he lost 30,000 men in the blink of an eye, in reference to the nuclear explosion in Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare. This is followed by Price coming out of nowhere and tackling Shepard. The two then fight with Soap crawling to a gun that's kicked away from him before getting stomped in the face. We then see the knife that Shepard put into Soap's chest and pull it out, throwing it right into Shepard's face. Soap then slowly fades out, but before he completely goes out, Price pops up and then drags him to Nikolai's helicopter. Price tells Nikolai that they need to get Soap out of there, and Nikolai responds by saying that he knows a place, and then the game ends. And there we have Modern Warfare 2. After finishing Modern Warfare 2, I could safely say that the game still hits the feels. There's so many epic moments that still give me the same vibes that I got playing the game years ago. It really should be stated, Modern Warfare 2 is like a cinematic spectacle that could be compared to the likes of big budget Hollywood films. We see this with levels such as Whiskey Hotel, Second Son, and even Wolverines. I'll just be honest, this aspect of the game is really what keeps things memorable for me personally. It isn't like it hasn't been done before with the Modern Warfare series, and it isn't like it never happened again after. But when it comes to the approach of so many levels in Modern Warfare 2 and specific, it's really like the game is more of a spectacle versus a simplistic military shooter. But even with that in mind, I do have to say that there were a few levels in the game that didn't feel as good as I had remembered. Take, for example, Takedown. Something about this level feels slow. It's filled with tons of choke points with the more narrow streets, and constantly feels like you're getting smoked from every angle. I hated going through this level and felt nothing but a sigh of relief when I was finally finished with it. And then it sort of continues on with the mission The Hornet's Nest later on. This is kind of the same deal, another mission filled with tons of choke points, though I at least found this one to be a lot more feasible to navigate without getting blasted from some ridiculous angle. This was another one that I just wanted to get through as quickly as possible. As for which missions I found to be the best and which ones I found to be the worst, starting with the best, I'd say that I found either Whiskey Hotel or Second Son to be the absolute strongest in the game. Whiskey Hotel has such an epic ending, with the run up the White House to pop off the green flare so the White House doesn't get leveled. And then with Second Son, there's something about the beginning where you're under fire and then watch the distant explosion go off and see helicopters raining down from the sky. The eventual downpour that occurs with the lighting in the game is really amazing too. And extra attention to detail, like the player's red dot not showing up due to the EMP, is a really nice touch as well. But outside of that, and as for the worst mission, I gotta give this one to Takedown. I don't know why, but it really feels annoying to play. Like, yeah, both Takedown and Hornet's Nest aren't amazing, but at least Hornet's Nest has that cinematic end where you're jumping to the helicopter ladder. That at least gives it very cool points. So moving along to the weapons of Modern Warfare 2, you have a lot of guns that made it back into the game. You got your akimbo guns, pistols, shotguns, assault rifles, sniper rifles, yada yada. I believe there are differences with the sounds of some of the guns in the remastered campaign versus the original Modern Warfare 2. There's other videos online covering some of these, so if you want to look this up to get a better understanding, I could provide a link below that does a better job at showcasing how different all the guns sound. But while I personally think the guns still feel amazing and think they still sound pretty okay for the most part, there is a clear difference for more than a handful of the weapons. Either way, there was always something different from how guns sounded in Modern Warfare 2 versus other entries. I don't exactly know why, but I always thought they sounded a lot more raw in the original, which is something that I actually preferred over over the remastered sounds. But moving on, we also have the game's soundtrack to talk about. Honestly, I consider Modern Warfare 2 2009's OST to be one of, if not the best soundtrack in the entire Call of Duty series. There's so many epic tracks, with my favorites being Green Flares, Zodiac Chase and Waterfall, and the Assaulting the Submarine Base launch tracks. It's also worth mentioning again, since I did this the last time I covered Modern Warfare 2. The main music of the game was composed by Lauren Balfe and Hans Zimmer, who had both worked for many years in the film industry, creating tracks for some of the biggest movies in Hollywood, something that really shows with the quality of the music in MW2. But beyond the music, you also have some great voice acting within MW2 as well. Of course, I mentioned Keith David in my previous video, a legendary actor who had voiced Navy commercials in the early 2000s, as well as notable characters like the Arbiter in Halo 2, and also acted in films like The Chronicles of Riddick and They Live. He was also the man responsible for the Ramirez Do Everything meme that existed back in the day due to his depiction of Sergeant Foley barking constant orders at the controlling player character James Ramirez. But outside of this, I didn't really name anyone else when the game had a lot of notable actors worth mentioning. For starters, Barry Pepper had voiced Corporal Dunn in the game. This is someone who had been in notable films like Saving Private Ryan and The Green Mile. But then aside from these two, you had Craig Fairbrass, who, in my opinion, did the best job at voicing Ghost. It's also worth noting that he voiced Gaz in the original Modern Warfare and Wallcroft in Modern Warfare 3. Funny enough, Fairbrass would go on to voice George Mason in the competitor series Battlefield. Apart from these guys, you also had Troy Baker, Will Arnett, and even 50 Cent doing voices. Overall, Modern Warfare 2 had a really high quality cast voicing everyone, and it really stands out even to this day. Moving along, it's probably worth mentioning the atmosphere of the game too. I mentioned earlier some of the best and worst levels, so I guess it's worth getting into more details. Some of the best levels are really the most cinematic ones. I mentioned Wolverine, Second Son, and Whiskey Hotel earlier. These levels are honestly brilliant in their own ways. With Wolverines, you have America being attacked by Russia in a Red Dawn kind of way. The whole mission feels like a war zone, with abandoned houses along the way with clear signs of chaos all around. It's epic, and when you eventually hit up the Burger Town section of the mission, there's something about it that hits the vibes that during war, even the most mundane locations like a simple fast food restaurant are no longer safe. And then with Second Son, we see sort of an over-the-top kind of level from the beginning where you're under fire and then get a shot of the nuke from space with the following explosion that results in all of the electronics in the level going off, as well as helicopters raining down from the sky. The end result of this is a relatively ominous level with the following heavy downpour that makes it feel more cinematic, and then the extra level of attention to detail with your red dot not working and flares and burning fires being the main source of illumination really add to the fantastic scenery and what I consider to be one of the better levels in the game. And then this level is immediately followed by what I consider to be the absolute best design level in the game, Whiskey Hotel. In this mission, you're retaking the White House to get aligned to Central Command before Washington, D.C. gets blown up. It's a tense level that feels extremely dramatic as you fight your way through the White House that gives vibes that you need to work fast or you're done. And that final finish to the end where the flares go off is just an overall incredibly powerful scene. Are these parts of the game unrealistic? Maybe. But are they still awesome? Absolutely. And that's pretty much what you could find throughout the game, and really reinforces the idea that Modern Warfare 2's campaign is more of a cinematic spectacle versus just a simple military shooter. So what about the flaws in Modern Warfare 2's remastered campaign? It's nitpicking, but I'd like to at least mention one or two things. For starters, I think I felt repetition towards more levels in this game than I originally remembered when I played it back in the day. This is something that I initially felt during the mission The Only Easy Day Was Yesterday. I don't know if it's because I've been so overexposed to these slow-mo breach and clear sequences since this game came out, but these just don't hit the same way as they used to. And then the fact that there's more than one of these sequences here, and even more in the following Gulag level, and then later on you get a bunch more during the level Loose Ends, it makes it feel a little like, I don't know, maybe they could have switched it up or something when they were designing this, or maybe just not had as many. Like when you see it the first time, it's kind of cool, but then you see it again and again and again, and I don't know why, but it just comes off as a little monotonous now. But like I said, it's a little nitpicky, but I find that this sort of stuff just doesn't hit the same way that it used to. There isn't really anything that could be done here to make it feel any different, and I at least appreciate that they didn't change the campaign, but I just figured that I'd mention that I find it kind of annoying now. now. But what I will say is an issue is things that take away from the original experience of Modern Warfare 2. I mean, maybe in some ways I understand why they removed the multiplayer component, but I have no clue why Spec Ops was removed. I think it would have been nice to have the option to at least keep these missions intact, since they wouldn't really have taken away from the newer Call of Duty games multiplayers too much, if at all. If anything, it would have made the game more enticing to actually buy in the first place, since the game's campaign is so short as it is. It's literally like a 5-hour campaign on regular difficulty. But that's all I really have to say about the Modern Warfare 2 Remastered campaign. It's a good story with a lot of cinematics that make it feel like an epic journey over anything else. Certain aspects of the game feel a bit annoying now, and some levels straight up suck, but the overall narrative of the game is still quite good and holds up in ways that I feel are far better than even the remakes of the Modern Warfare games. Do I wish they would have kept some things like the original gun sounds intact? Yeah, sure, but I don't think the new ones really hurt anything too much. It's just the option of being able to switch between the two would have been nice if that were somehow possible. I also have to give props because they didn't mess with the campaign by removing things like no Russian for being controversial or something, so that at least gives a thumbs up from my end too. I know this won't be something I do too much of, but I was at least glad to revisit another one of my favorite first-person shooters, and one that I still believe has a far superior campaign to the remake. Like, yeah, the remake looks great and everything, and maybe there's some degree of nostalgia for me for the original Modern Warfare 2, but the remake just doesn't have the same pizzazz due to some characters seeming like they were downgraded or just not seeming as interesting as their original counterparts. But that's really just a personal gripe. Even if you're someone who hates Call of Duty, the original Modern Warfare 2 will always be one of the best of its kind, and that's something to give a nod to. And while my own days of going into Call of Duty lobbies and talking smack are long over, there'll always be nostalgic memories that I cherish. But at the end of the day, I'm glad that we at least got a remaster of Modern Warfare 2 instead of the game being buried and forgotten like so many other memorable games that'll probably never see the light of day again. Thank you all for watching. I really do appreciate you all taking the time to stick around to the end. If you like this video, please consider liking and subscribing. It helps me out. This is another video that I wanted to redo since I feel like my first time taking a crack at it, I didn't entirely do the game justice. But anyways, thank you again for your support, and I'll see you next time. Peace out.